So a lot of people really liked my video on how to make a worship pedal board for just $1,000. So I thought it'd be a good idea to go through and show how I use each of the pedals on this board and how to get a lot of different sounds with just a couple overdrives. So I'm just running from the guitar into the board, into the Kemper, which is on a cleanish Vox AC30 profile. Sounds like this. So it's just breaking up a little bit if I really dig in. That's how I like to set up my amps. It's pretty common. It's called edge of breakup. I don't like to set my amps super clean. There's no real rules, but that's how I like to do it. So the first pedal I want to hit is the Digitech Polara that I mentioned in the other video. It's just a simple reverb pedal, but it sounds really good. I have it set on the hall mode with about a medium mix, medium time. And now that's always on. I might bump up or down the level and time depending on the song, but that's kind of my bass tone. So the first pedal in the chain obviously is the compressor. Again, I have it set to medium compression and a low blend, which gives me a lot more sustain. So I'll play something and then switch the compressor on and off so you can hear it bumping the signal level up and down as the note trails off. So when I turn it off, the note jumped down. When I turn it back on, the note jumped up, taking the decay of the note and lifting that up a little bit. So the next pedal in the tone workstation is the 1962 Overdrive by Keeley. And here's how that sounds with everything all the way up. So that's a lot of distortion. Now the reason I have it set that way is because I can roll off my tone. If I flip over to the neck pickup, I can roll off my volume and tone a lot and really get a clean sound. And then when the big part of the chorus comes in, I can just bump it up a little bit. And all I'm doing is changing my tone and volume knobs on the guitar and how hard I'm picking. I'm not jumping between 4 different overdrives that all sound the same in a live mix anyways. If you're on a budget, this is really the way to go. And it'll help you develop your picking dynamics of your right hand. The next pedal is a second overdrive in the tone workstation. It's Keeley's Tube Screamer mod. It's pretty high gain and pretty noisy. You can kind of hear some noise going on, but you'd use this during a solo or like a huge lead part. It's a tube screamer, so it's got a really heavy mid bump, which will help you jump out in front of the mix. Mids are where the guitar really lives. If your tone's too scooped, you're going to disappear in the mix because the bass and the cymbals are going to be way louder than you. I always bump up the mids on any amp that I play, so I can sit there nicely in the mids. Then we go into the volume pedal. It's pretty self-explanatory. Then we go to the zoom. So the zoom, you can run 6 effects at once. The first effect I always run is a noise suppressor. Just helps for like clean, quiet parts. And then right now I have it set up as like my standard big delay setting for swells, which is what this sounds like. So if I'm doing a big swell or something, that's that sound. If I need a different sound, I can just bump over the next sound that I have programmed, which is a clean boost, which just makes it louder, obviously. Then I have a chorus sound, which I don't use a lot, but you know, sometimes you have to. Then I have a tremolo. So I use that for like a song like Mighty Warrior. So basically, I just have to program in the sounds that I want for the set in advance, and then I can, between songs or in a down part, I can just switch between them. And then I'm ready to go for the next part. So the problem with using one pedal for a lot of these sounds is live flexibility, because a lot of times you need to jump into a swell part really fast and you don't have time to switch between settings. So normally I do use the Digitech Obscura delay, which does have tails, which I mentioned in the other video. So when I flip it off, it doesn't cut off the delay sound immediately, but it keeps trailing on, which is good for a swell. So that's set to a tape sound that goes on pretty long, pretty similar to that. So that is normally on my board. But it's not a necessary thing. So from the zoom, we go into the time factor. I've had the time factor almost since it came out. It's just a really solid, simple delay. Every parameter is controlled by a knob. There's not a lot of sub-menus or anything. It's got a low-pass filter, which is really important for making analog sound. In my other video, I recommended the DD20, which is a great pedal, but for how I play, I like to have presets of any sound I could need available. So for an extra $100 or so, you can grab the time factor, and it really just makes everything a lot easier to have a lot of presets. So how I have it set up is I have most of the sounds that I would need programmed in there. So for example, I have 4 different quarter note sounds, starting from a really low mix, dark sound to a heavy mix, bright sound. So if I go to bank 1, this is what that sounds like. So it's pretty dark. And then if I go up to bank 2, this is my 4th quarter note sound. So it's a lot brighter, and the trails keep going for a lot longer. I do the same thing with the dotted eighth note, because dotted eighths can get out of control really easily when you have a lot of notes that are going in between the notes that you're playing. It can just get really muddy really fast, so I'm always pretty conservative with how I use dotted eighth. Then the next bank I have a solo sound that's just a longer delay. It's about 500 milliseconds, and it's a pretty dark analog sound. Because when you're playing a solo, that delay helps fill up some space, but you don't want it to get in the way of your actual playing, so it just kind of sits in the background really nice. Then in that same bank I have a slapback sound, which is just a dark analog sound that's set to 16th notes, and that covers pretty much any delay sound you could need in a worship environment. Sometimes I'll need something weird like a reverse sound, so I'll just program that sound into the next bank, and I can just jump there really quickly for the song that I need it for. 99% of the time with those 10 sounds, I can cover any delay sound I need for almost any song. I just have to pick the one I want and then tap in the tempo. Another nice thing about the time factor is that if I'm playing a part and I decide that I have too much delay or too little delay, the time factor remembers the tempo that you tapped in, and I can switch to a different preset and not have to tap the tempo in again. So if I'm playing and it feels a little bit too muddy, I can just jump down to the previous preset, and I know that it'll clean it up a little bit and it won't be as muddy without having to tap in the tempo again. So the last pedal is the Boss RV6, which I just have set to a really big reverb sound. Sounds like this, which is really nice for the swell thing again. So that's it on the pedals. So now I just wanted to give a couple examples of using picking dynamics in your tone and volume knobs to switch between parts of the song without having to switch any overdrives. So this is an oldie, but it's one of my favorites. To play the intro riff, I'm just on the neck pickup with my volume at about 3 and the tone rolled pretty far down. When it goes to the pre-chorus, all I'm doing is switching to the bridge pickup and playing a little harder. And then in the chorus, I'm just rolling up my volume a little bit. So here's what that sounds like. So with all that distortion, I was still only on 7 on my volume, so I still had more room to go. But that's all from on overdrive, just using picking dynamics, my volume knob, and switching between the pickups. Another great example of this is the song Grace So Glorious from an Elevation record a few years ago. Turn on a big reverb here and get to a smaller dotted eighth sound and tap in the tempo. I think it's like 65 BPM. It has the little instrumental part where it's pretty clean. In the big part of the song, I would just flip off the reverb and it would sound like this. So the only other thing that I wanted to cover in this video is buffers. I see a lot of guys will have a buffer, but then they'll also have an always-on compressor or something, which is really redundant. If you have a pedal that's always on, any pedal that's on has a low impedance output, so your highs won't be rolled off as much. So if you have an always-on compressor or any pedal that has buffer bypass, you don't need a dedicated buffer in your signal unless you have a gigantic board that's full of true bypass pedals and you don't use a compressor on all the time. So that's a pretty quick explanation, but hopefully that makes sense. So don't worry about having a dedicated buffer if you have a compressor and an overdrive that are always on like I do. So that's it. Hopefully this helped you understand how to cover a lot of ground with a small board, and hopefully it'll free up some money so you can buy a nice guitar and a nice amp instead of $200 overdrive pedals. Remember to subscribe, or if you have any questions, let me know in the comments. Thanks, guys.